Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone is well. Please, can I just get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, I have a question already. Yes. Or was that a thumbs up? Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen quickly. And I also want to apologize in advance if you hear some back. It is 3 dogs and 1 child. Okay, but they're going to keep as quiet as they possibly can. Okay, so today's session, we're trying to cover as much content as we possibly can, especially in the first learning unit. So, is there a question? Okay, no questions. Okay, so we're going to try and cover as much as possible. So, between strategic management and supply chain management, we're going to cover quite a bit. And we're going to go into some of the different concepts like Rumel's design or Mintzberg's design, as well as your Potter's competitive strategies, etc. So we're going to go through a lot more in terms of that explanation itself. If you are stuck at any point, please just unmute yourself. I can't always see the screens for the chat box or the questions. So I would like for you to just unmute yourself and we can take it forward from there. So just to set the scene, we're going to go into a bit of what is supply chain, what is strategic management, and then what is also the role of strategy within supply chain management. So I want to try and cover Learning Unit 1 as well as Learning Unit 2 because there's a lot of similarities between not Learning Unit 1, Theme 1 and Theme 2 within Learning Unit 1 due to the fact that there's a lot of similarities between the two themes. So I don't want to have a break in that sort of communication because you would tend to now forget what we sort of discussed if I have to move on to the next one in the next week. Okay. So firstly, just looking at some of your supply chain concepts. The first one is strategic management. So strategic management is basically it's how you look at formulating or just the implementation of long-term goals that top management tends to make in a business, whether it's for a 3-year period. A lot of corporate companies look at a 3 to 5 year goal setting or goal objectives for the business. And that's what they try to achieve, set out by different outcomes within the business. So you want to sort of look at analyzing internal, your external, different environments. And a lot of it has to do with SWOT analysis. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, looking at strengths and weaknesses internally from a business perspective, and then your opportunities and threats where we look at from an outside or an external environment perspective. You want to set as many objectives as you possibly can, um, as well as try and formulate as much strategies as possible in order for you to have some sort of control, and then you can evaluate, to move on to the next cycle. You want to do it as efficiently and as effectively as you possibly can. Then we have what is supply chain management. And I think a lot of us are here for the supply chain perspective of it. And this is absolutely basic. It's how do you move your goods, your any sort of data integrity or any finances related to a specific product from a beginning stage of raw materials, that's when you buy your raw materials, right down to when a customer or a consumer takes the final delivery of the product. So that is the basic of what supply chain management is. And as we progress in this specific learning unit, we'll understand different concepts, different benefits of supply chain, and how we could use this and how businesses basically would use this. When we look at strategic supply chain management, you want to look at it from a perspective of how can you bring in as much efficiency by goal setting, by creating objectives in order for you to get as much optimization as possible in your supply chain itself. You want to deliver a product to a customer, which allows the customer to keep coming back for more. You want to have cost efficiency in the business by doing that. And how do you best do it? By making sure you get value for your money when you're talking about procurement of raw materials in your production process, how best you can, ensure your production is as streamlined as possible so that you get a better quality from your production process or your manufacturing process. So when we talk about strategic management, there is different sort of stages that we look at, and it looks absolutely simple, and it's probably something that if any of you guys are working in a corporate environment, it's something that you currently are doing, but you're just not terming it, if that makes sense. So the stages of strategic management is number one, understanding where you are going in the business. So what is your current business direction? What is your mission? What is your vision? What is your values of your business? You need to understand, excuse me, your mission statement for your business. Why does your business now exist? And what is your primary objective in your business? What do you want to achieve at the concepts, what beliefs, what concepts are there um, that would guide your business's behavior and any sort of decision making processes? The next one is, as I mentioned in the beginning, the SWOT analysis that you would be doing. So when we're looking at it from an external environment, you want to look at opportunities and threats. So anybody for that matter, if you want to take on a new business venture, let's say you're an entrepreneur in the making, you want to understand what sort of product you want to sell to the market or what sort of service you want to deliver to a customer. Based on that, you need to do a SWOT analysis. So looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of your current business, that was be your internal analysis, and then your opportunities and threats externally. So when we're looking at it from an external perspective, you want to understand different tools. Okay. So one of the most common tools that's used from an external perspective is the PESTEL environment. So what is the P, which is political, your E, which is economic, your S, which is social, your T is technological, environmental for E, and legal for L. So that is one of your analysis tools that you can look at from an external environment. And then your Porter's forces, which I'm going to go through in the upcoming slides. But this allows for you to identify any sort of opportunity for growth, any sort of opportunity for development, and any threat that can hinder your success to grow a good business. When we look at it from an internal perspective, so strengths and weaknesses, you want to understand what is your internal resources that you have, any sort of capabilities, what makes you great at what you're doing, as well as to identify any weaknesses that you may have, whether it is from a financial perspective, human capital perspective, technology, different processes that you're using, or just build on your culture. A lot of businesses pride themselves on culture. So looking at like businesses that have for multiple years be employer of the year. What makes them great? They celebrate every sort of holiday, or every sort of event, whether it's Women's Day, Valentine's Day, these sort of things bring in culture. So that's a huge strength for the business because they are, from an employee or a public perspective, they're a great employer. And this is what brings in, good talent or great talent in order to take the business to the next level. Then you want to do as much strategy formation as possible. You want to do something where you can develop any sort of action plan to make sure that your business achieves their objectives based on what your strength and what your weaknesses are, and then analyze what your external opportunities and threats are. Then you want to execute your plan. How best can you execute it? You want to choose different strategies that actually helps you to achieve that objective. Um, you want to be able to translate your plans into actions and also make sure that you have enough resources to effectively action those plans. And then the last one is you want to evaluate how successful your plan is. And here we put a lot of performance KPIs and control measures in place. So whether it's monitoring different initiatives, evaluating your performance against different objectives or different targets, and also taking action as much as possible. So using KPIs in order for you to assess performances. So if you have to look at it in hindsight, it's when you are a business person or you in a strategic management position in a corporate environment, these are a lot of times the steps that you would take in order for you to take on a new objective, take on a new goal. How best can you now strategize this? There's different ways of putting this together. Okay, then we want to look at Porter's strategy, which I made mention of before. And in hindsight, Porter's strategy is absolutely simple. You want to be able to create a strategy that allows for sustainability, number one, in your business. And number two is pushing out the best performance that you possibly can. And there's three sort of focus areas with it, which is cost leadership, as you see in the top right quadrant or top left quadrant, differentiation, and then focus, whether it's a cost focus or a differentiation focus. When we're talking about cost leadership perspective, you, as a business, you want to aim to be either the lowest cost producer in a specific environment that you're in. When you're talking about differentiation, you want to be able to offer a product or a service that is unique to the market. Maybe it's a high value product, or maybe it's just a service that is of premium quality. Maybe it's a personalized service. So a lot of times, especially when you are running, and I know a lot of us now in this sort of generation, we look at um, e-commerce completely change our lives. I mean, not very often you walk into a store that you can buy things off the shelf or you would want to buy things off the shelf. A lot of us are now shopping online. And if we have to look at differentiation, a lot of e-commerce businesses are allowing for personalization of their products, whether it means you're buying a necklace or a hand chain that has a specially engraved name or a birthday or a specific date or a saying on it. We are allowed to now personalize and customize our items online. Even if you're buying a branded T-shirt or a customized, personalized T-shirt, we're allowed to now do that. And this is what businesses are now trying to be different with. And that's where your differentiation trait is now coming into play. And then the last one is focus. So when you're looking at focus, it's where you are targeting a specific market niche. Maybe it is you are an e-commerce business and your focus is on software or something to do with water sports. Your target market would probably be in an area that has an ocean, you know? So that's where you would focus it in. Maybe it's a Durban, maybe it's a Cape Town. So you can split your focus into a cost focus drive, which is you are trying to seek a more cost advantage in this specific market, or you are trying to be more personalized or different in a specific market. So this is how you can basically switch between the two. So this is Porter's strategy or Porter's competitive forces. And this allows for businesses to understand and realize how best they can be different in the market, maybe cheaper option or a different option or just a specific focused option. And this allows you to split between the four quadrants on the strategy side. Okay, is there any questions so far? Okay, we're going to then move on to what we know as shared value and value chain. So when we're looking at shared value, it's basically a concept that was introduced by Porter, so Michael Porter, that emphasizes the idea that businesses can generate economic value, meaning bring in money for your shareholders, and still have a society value, which means that a community can still benefit from that specific business in which they operate in. So it means you are creating a some sort of competitive advantage by making sure that your business goals are aligned with your social goals, and can also be that your business goals is aligned with your environmental goals, whether you have a sustainability policy, whether you have an environmental policy in which you reuse and recycle, maybe you are aiming to have a better carbon footprint, or you have different environmental policies in place. Maybe the specific product that you are manufacturing is known to be harmful. Then you can put in different carbon emission strategies. So it's having a full-on shared value where you're making money as a business, but you're also contributing and trying to help the community as much as possible. So you want to identify the various opportunities in a shared value setting itself. When we're talking about a value chain, basically this is also a concept by Michael Porter, but it allows for the different sequences in an activity, whether it means you are producing a product and delivering a product to a customer. So, whereas the full on primary, secondary support activities, all of it adds value to a final product. So, when we're talking about your primary activities, this is something that is directly involved in you creating the product and you delivering that product, whether it is the procurement of raw materials, it is the inbound logistics, the operations, or your manufacturing, or your outbound logistics, meaning your delivery to your customer. When we're looking at support functions, these are any other functions in a business that helps you to deliver that product, whether it is procurement or technology or human resources, finance, quality control. Um, this is what your support activities would be in your value chain. Um, so at every step of the way, or at every stage of your um, full on value chain process, you are trying to add as much value as possible at these stages so that you can strive to optimize your value chain by creating some sort of cost efficiency, maybe improving your quality, and also making sure that your product is as different as possible. Okay, so that's the difference between having a shared value versus what your value chain is in the business. Okay, I think a lot of businesses now are going the shared valued approach purely because, especially when you're looking at like triple BE, for instance, a lot of times now there's a lot of different stages that's added in there in order for you to be, sort of relevant and wanting to partner with businesses that are at a lower level. You need to have the criteria sticked, and a lot of it now has to do with different sustainability policies that you're now bringing into the market. Okay, then we want to talk about how we link strategy with um, supply chain management. So as we know, strategy is quite competitive. Our supply chain is quite competitive, and it's also at a point where you want your supply chain to speak to what your objectives are, what your goals are, and how best your different visions, missions, um, um, and different values that you put into your business link in with every step of the way. So you want to speak a lot about what your um, alignment is with your different business objectives in order for you to be successful and competitive in the market. You want your supply chain to make sure that it's aligned with your broader business objectives and your priorities. You want to be competitive in the market. Um, you want to optimize as much as possible. You want to reduce cost. You want to improve quality. You'll see there's a lot of repetition when you're talking about supply chain specifically. Cost efficiency is number one. Everyone wants to be as, let's say, cheap as possible, but as budget friendly as possible. You want the best quality of product, and you also want customer satisfaction. So, what is your responsiveness of your product in the market? You want to be able to minimize as much risk as possible and uncertainty. You want a supply chain that is as agile as possible. I mean, a lot of businesses, when sort of 2020 COVID hit and we went into the various restrictions, a lot of businesses couldn't function because they weren't, what was it? Those, where you could basically function. And businesses had to change the way that they worked. A lot of them had to move into a more of an agile supply chain where they had to quickly change the ways of working. So if you have to look at a full supply chain and someone has to import their raw materials from, let's say, India and China, the transit time that was most often, with ocean freight, anything between 28 and 32 days, landed in South Africa, then became anything between 70 and 90 days. So it pushes out your supply chain quite massively. So there needs to be a huge revisit of how best can you procure your raw materials from a local market. Is a local market involved in production of that raw materials, or how do they now work it? So everyone had to now revisit different ways of procurement, supply relationships, supply integrity, so that they can have business continuity at the end of the day. Okay, so you'll see a little bit of change of slides, and that's because we are now slowly sliding into our next theme. And our next theme, it takes us directly into Mitzberg design as well as the emergence of it. So the first thing is, when we're talking about Mitzberg's design, is we want to look at the rationale behind it. Is it a sort of top-down approach to developing a specific strategy, or what is the plan? How do you best formulate it? When we're looking at emergence, it's different strategies that evolve organically over time. You want to be able to have an agile and a good learning experience when we come to um, when it comes to you having a good supply chain. So the first thing is you want to understand what is a good strategy and what is a bad strategy. And Rumel's approach and Mitzberg's approach is very fundamentally about how can you align your supply chain with different principles, whether it means you are looking at a diagnosis of a situation, so understanding what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that a business basically struggles from. You want to know what the different internal and external factors are that affects your supply chain itself, the different market dynamics that go through it. How does your customers' demand now change in the market? What does your competitors look like? You want to understand what the situation and the problem is that your business is currently facing, to know whether you have a good strategy or a bad strategy that's now working or not working. Then you want to focus on what is your competitive advantage in the market. So you want to know whether, or you want to develop a clear and a very compelling strategy that basically speaks about your business's strength. You want to also identify different capabilities in the market so that you can have as much optimization of your supply chain as you possibly can. Then you want to go into the creation of actions. So here we are aligning your actions with your strategy. But here you also want to identify what is your root cause analysis of strategic challenges. You want to streamline your processes. You want to collaborate with different suppliers, different partners. You want to do as much optimization of inventory, get better pricing from a transport perspective or cost advantage from a transport perspective. And you want it to align to what a broader strategic direction is. Then the next one is execution and adaptation. So you'll see a lot of it has to do with what is my problem? How can I fix my problem? What is my action plan? How can I action my action plan? And then how do I now review it so that I have a good turnover the next time that I to have a next goal setting or a next strategy. So when we're talking about execution and adaptation, you want to be able to translate your strategy into action. You want to be able to translate it into a specific outcome. And by doing this, you need clear communication. You need stronger leadership. You want to be able to monitor your performance KPIs, so key performance matrix, key performance indicators. Um, and you want to be able to adapt properly to any sort of changing in market conditions. Maybe someone's taste has changed. So let's say you are in a space of textile or fashion. Um, people's tastes tend to change. I think a lot of it is a cost factor as well. So previously, where people would have a certain style and they would buy from a high-end product or a high-end consumer retailer like a Zara or a H&M or a Edgar's for that matter, the TFG group, those items tend to be on the pricier side, so catering more towards your higher LSM market. Whereas the introduction of like your Sheins and your Timus, etc., where you can get similar products at a cheaper price, people are sort of flocking towards that as their, first choice now, as opposed to what it was before. And then the last one is we're looking at the integration of activities, where in this case, there's a lot of emphasis on integrating different activities across the business so that you have better synergy, you have better effectiveness. You want to do as much collaboration as possible between all of your departments, whether it is a procurement or a distribution or a production or even an after sales like customer services. When you're looking at a returns process. So back on the e-commerce side, if you buy an item and you don't like it, you have a bit of buyer's remorse, or the item doesn't fit, or the quality is not up to your standard. What is that sort of after sale? So it's all fair and well how we get a product through the supply chain directly delivered to your door, but how do we now do the return leg of it? Is it as seamless as the delivery aspect was, or is it now become an absolute difficult, schlep of a process to get the return now processed? Okay, so that's basically how we look at good strategy versus bad strategy, and focusing on strategic thinking, focusing on action plans. Um, you want to look at these five sort of approaches in order for you to go down the way of creating a strategy that makes sense for your business. Okay. Then we want to look at strategy versus supply chain, which is very similar to what we had gone through already, but just creating that link when we're talking about, sort of different business objectives, risk factors. You want to have a good customer value proposition where your supply chain directly influences your business's ability to deliver a product or deliver a value to a customer. It needs to be a very well designed supply chain that allows the business to meet customer demands, deliver your product in a timely manner, and also provide superior customer services. So a lot of times what happens with supply chain, especially when you come towards the tail end of the delivery aspect, the logistics part of it, a lot of times what happens is responsiveness and communication, and that's where there's a huge lack of focus. What my expectation is of a customer is very different to what the business is providing. So if we are in constant communication, the supply chain flow ends up being absolutely seamless. So a lot of it has to do with communication, transparency, and just having a good responsiveness at the end. Then we want to talk a little bit about innovation. How best can you bring in innovation and bring in a lot more flexibility into your business? You want to be able to have, um, the way of working now is bringing in a lot of technology and automation. How best you can adopt new processes that actually works for different businesses in similar industries, collaborating with different partners. So a lot of times what happens is you would meet a supplier maybe in a developed country. They do things a lot more differently there. How can they bring that approaches into your businesses? You can learn a lot by just having those basic conversations with people from different industries or people from different countries or different developing and developed nations. Um, and then the last one is basically promoting as much sustainability as possible. Also having a good CSR, corporate social responsibility is big for a lot of corporate businesses now. How can you not only minimize your carbon footprint and environmental footprint, but also how can you help your community at the end of the day? So, the link between the both from a supply chain and a strategy perspective is quite important in order for a lot of businesses to have their objectives ticked off and also for them to be as competitive in the in the marketplace as they possibly can. So a good strategy, a good supply chain allows for the direction to be supported in, for a specific business. You want to mitigate all your risks. You want to add value to your customer. And this is what makes a business basically successful. It all comes down to the planning of it. If you don't have a good plan, unfortunately, you are not going to be very successful. And if you don't take into account what your risks are going to be in the market, and you don't account for that risk or try and have a plan for mitigation, it does become very difficult for you to recover from it. Okay, so I think you can see that there's a little bit of repetition, but the reason being is because you want to try and cover as much holisticness as possible. And the first one is looking at supply chain management specifically, which is the reason why you're here. So when we're looking at supply chain management, it's basically coordinating all of these activities from sourcing to procurement to manufacturing and converting a product from a raw material to a finished good to actually delivering it to the point of customer. So there's a lot of planning that goes into the process, execution, control, where you're moving a raw material into a finished good at the end of the day. So the end goal of the supply chain is to create a lot of optimization, a lot of efficiency, and a lot of effectiveness for you to meet your customers' demand while still controlling your cost and while still controlling as much of your um, quality as possible, and in the same turn, maintaining and maximizing profit in your business. Um, so you want to have this collaboration between all your various stakeholders, whether it's from a supplier to a manufacturer to a retailer to an end customer who actually gives you feedback, both positive and negative, of how best you can improve. Um, so there's a lot of different components that sit in together, and that's how your supply chain is basically function. Supply chain doesn't exist in one part of the business. Every link, like you see a bicycle chain, there's different links in order for you to get the bicycle to function and to move. Similarly, every activity function, every department in an organization needs to work together in a chain in order for you to move forward successfully. You'll see that as we go along through the semester, we'll speak on different supply chain or different systems that you use, whether it's an MRP system or an ERP system or a SAP system. It's most beneficial for the entire business to be off one system so that everyone can talk to each other. So when you have an order creation that goes through a production phase, sales is now putting that order in. So the sales team can see it, manufacturing can see it, finance can see it because they're now invoicing that particular order. Logistics and dispatch is seeing it because they now need to move that particular order. So you can see how every department together now needs to function in order for your supply chain to now be successful. Okay, then we want to talk on the evolution of supply chain management. So when we're looking at sort of early development, and I'm talking absolutely early back in the day before all of us were born stages, supply chains were absolutely simple. It was very localized, meaning that it was sitting in the same state that you would operate in or the same city you would operate in, where transport was never an issue. There was a very limited coordination. There was very limited communication between the different various departments. Um, Especially when you're talking about production and you're talking about distribution, there was a lot of limitations when it came to that. So the focus primarily at that point was trying to have as low cost as you possibly can and then create as much efficiency with every single function. So procurement will have minimal cost for maximum efficiency, production, distribution, etc., etc. So this was obviously early development stages. The next one is integration and expansion. So as your sort of markets expanded and sort of globalization started to take into shape round about like the 20th century, a lot of supply chains became a little bit more complex and a little bit more interconnected with each other, meaning that businesses now tried to integrate their supply chain with each other, whether it was from a vertical perspective, meaning in every single department, or whether it was a horizontal perspective, meaning, between your supplier and then your customer and your customer's customer and your supplier's customer. That's where a lot of the integration and collaboration now came into play, where you will optimize your operations as much as possible and also maintain that you are meeting your customers' growing demands. Then we went into the sort of 21st century, which is where information technology now sort of revolutionized. So when tech came into play, supply chains then became ERP systems, EDI systems, so electronic data exchange system, APS systems or API systems, whether it was advanced planning, all of these various systems allowed for businesses to now digitize, allowed for businesses to now create as much automation in their business so that their supply chain processes became a lot more efficient. It allowed for more visibility of their supply chain, allowed for more transparency of it, and also allowed for better communication across the entire supply chain network, whether it was between various departments or activities, or whether it was between supplier to customer. Then we moved on even further into a globalization stage and an outsourcing stage. And this sort of came in, I would say, like around about the 21st, towards the ending of, well, the 21st century, where it became a lot more dispersion and dissection of your supply chain. And this went off into different geographical regions. So businesses now tend to, or began to, source materials from low cost countries. Um, whether it meant them having a longer lead time or a more complex supply chain. The shift basically came because new strategies were now brought into the business. Um, the strategies also allowed for um, global supply chains to come into play, or global supply networks to come into play, so that it just became a better network system, and um, businesses accounted for their supply chains to be longer, and that communication also became better because of the planning stages to their customers on lead times and transit times and expectation of delivery, etc. Then we go into digital transformation and something that you call Industry 4.0. Um, and here it basically is the rise of your digital technology, whether it is artificial intelligence, whether it is the Internet of Things, whether it's blockchain solutions, or whether it's just having big data integrity or big data analytics. It's basically, this is what is became the driving force of the digital transformation era, especially in supply chain. So with Industry 4.0 specifically, the aim is to create a lot more of smart, connected, autonomous supply chain, so that you have a completely different ecosystem that is focused on real-time data. It's focused on having data analytics that allows you to be a little bit more predictable and to predict your demand. Therefore, you can account for better supply. Also, bringing in automation, whether it is from a logistics perspective, volumizers, or camera focused weighing and dimension SWAT machines. You know, this helps to improve your decision making in your business. It has better revenue driven forces. Um, and also, it promotes a little bit more of agility, and it promotes a little bit more of responsiveness of your business and of your supply chain. And then the last one is having resilience and having risk. So, with a lot of recent disruptions, whether it is Mother Nature pulling its course, or natural disasters, or it's geopolitical tensions, I mean, Russia and Ukraine, for instance, whether it was COVID-19 pandemic, all of this basically brought into play how resilient a supply chain actually needs to be, and how much risk management follows suit in supply chain operations. So a lot of businesses have put in a lot more focus on building resilient supply chains that can withstand and control as much disruption as possible, whether it means you are diversifying your sourcing and production, whether you are sourcing better locations for production, implementing sort of anything from a risk implementation perspective, so that you can minimize your supply chain disruption as much as possible. Like for instance, when Durban had the or KZN had the strike action or protest action a few years ago, sort of post that, many businesses decided to close shop in Durban specifically and move up to a more stable political economy or a more stable political city. I mean, I had a customer that sells very high value items, and they were affected during the looting time or the protest action time, and they decided after that they were closing shop and they were moving the entire operations through to Cape Town. Yes, it did have a longer stem to the client market because you're now shipping, where your target market was primarily in Durban, you're now shipping from Cape Town to Durban, which is predominantly a 2-day service. You're now going from having your customers serviced in a 24-hour period to now having them serviced anything between 48 to 72 hours. That completely changed the supply chain of this customer. However, from a risk and an agile perspective, in order for them to have a more non-disruptive supply chain, they still decided to change their operational location. Okay, so these are sort of things that businesses would look at, especially when you have to look at the evolution or the complete change from within your supply chain. Okay, then I want to run over some of the functions of supply chain. Also, NB on this one, a lot of times it does come out in assignments and um, ICE tasks, etc. But just looking at the different functions, there is a lot more than this. I just pulled out a few just so that I can, have some uh, talking points and some explanations through to you, but obviously look at every single function. One of the most important ones is procurement, and this is where you would source your components or your raw materials, from different suppliers in order for you to support your particular operations that you're running. So there's different criterias when procurement functions operate. They look at pricing, they look at quality, they look at how you operate, what type of business you are, what is your triple BE level. So depending on the state of your business or your current corporate nature, the requirements change all the time. Um, so be that as it may, when you are onboarded in as a supplier, how do you best negotiate different terms, different contracts? Um, what is the management of that supplier relationship? Do you have monthly KPIs with them to ensure that they're having to provide good service delivery to you at the right cost, at the right quality, etc. Then we have production planning. So this is more from a manufacturing perspective. It's how you're planning and scheduling your processes in order to have as much optimization of your production process as you possibly can. You're meeting the schedules in order for you to meet the customer's demand, while still minimizing costs, while still maximizing your efficiency in your business. So a lot of this function focuses primarily on demand and the forecasting of demand, developing any production plan, scheduling your manufacturing around that, and then managing your inventory thereafter once your production process is concluded. Then it comes down to your inventory management, which is how can you best manage the flow of your goods and manage the flow of the different materials that is running through your supply chain, while still not having high carrying costs, meaning you're not sitting with a huge amount of stock on your floor that is sitting in possibly obsolete products, and you're not sitting with too little products, which means that you're not catering to your customers' a demand of the product. Then we have logistics and transportation, which is one of the key aspects in a supply chain and sort of what closes the entire loop. This is the physical movement of your product from a supplier or from yourself to a customer. Whether it is full on logistics from a warehousing perspective or a transport perspective, freight management, route optimization, how do you track it? How do you make sure that the customer gets a great customer experience at the end? Then we have demand planning and forecasting. This is quite essential when we're looking at supply chain management. It's how can you best predict your future customers' demand for a product or your future customers' demand for a service that they want. And this is by using historical data. So a lot of times what happens when people develop budgets, they look at current year or previous year plus 10%, 20%, depending on market. And then they predict what your current year is going to be. And this is how they sort of use different market trends, different statistical models in order for you to better forecast and better demand plan. And then the last one is distribution and fulfillment. It's basically managing your distribution network from an order fulfillment perspective, delivering to the customer the best way you possibly can and as accurately as you possibly can. So this is whether it is order picking, order processing, um, putting an item together, so like assembly, sub-assembly, and then finally delivery. So this is just some of the functions of a supply chain management process. Okay, then we want to talk a little bit about the concerns that impact a supply chain. So we spoke about a little bit of it, something like natural disaster, geopolitical tensions, cyber attacks, um, COVID-19 pandemic. All of this can disrupt the flow of goods across your supply chain. So a lot of it can lead to delays, a lot of it can lead to shortages, a lot more cost because you now have to pull from Peter and pay Paul, and finally can have a lot of customer dissatisfaction. Um, so challenges and concerns are a reality. A lot of it can impact your efficiency of your business. It can impact your resilience and also cause a lot of competitiveness in your operations. So this is just highlighting some of them. The next one is globalization. So globalization, especially if you are importing from, low cost countries, etc. A lot of times now what happens is there's a lot of dispersion of your supply chain. So there's trade uncertainty, there's tariff increases, there's trade disputes where you can't buy from this country and take to another country from a transshipment perspective. Um, a lot of it impacts your procurement of your raw material. So you want to take note of this being a concern for your supply chain. Then we have volatility of demand, and this is where your customers' demand fluctuates quite often. Different market trends happen, consumer changes their behavior, they have, buyer's remorse. It can create a lot of volatility in your demand and then create the uncertainty in your supply chain. So you can have a lot of inventory imbalances, you can have a lot of stockouts, you can have a lot of or too much of stock, which can impact your supply chain, both from a cost perspective, efficiency perspective, and a profitability perspective. The next one is skills shortages. So talent acquisition is quite big because a lot of it has to do with, as much as you now bring in digitization into play, there's a huge amount of human behavior and human talent that's required. So the supply chain industry can face a lot of challenges when it comes to this, talent acquisition, skills shortages, retention of staff, because of the evolution of the supply chain. um, you need a lot more skilled workforce with expertise of how to control that digitization and that technology, whether it's data analytics, whether it's IT requirements, digital technology requirements, sustainability requirements. So there's a huge skills shortage of it because people are not going in with the trend of how digitization has followed through. And therefore, we're not getting as skilled labor as that. And then the last one is cybersecurity, and this is from a risk perspective. Because you have that much of digitization and inter sort of connectedness with your supply chain, there's a lot of cybersecurity risks and cybersecurity threats. that can pose a huge concern for your supply chain itself. So cyber attacks a lot of times impacts or targets supply chain systems, different networks. I mean, we all probably saw a million and one movies about these, where a cyber attack can completely stop your entire business operation completely. So it can lead to a lot of financial losses. It can lead to reputational damages. It can be a huge concern. Then we want to look at the benefits of supply chain management. So supply chain, I mean, there can be a whole host of different benefits for businesses itself from different industries, whether it is cost savings, efficiencies, different effectiveness within the business, bringing in customer satisfaction. Um, so one of it is cost avoidance or cost reduction. So you want to optimize your supply chain so that you have as much cost saving as you possibly can. You want to streamline your operation. You want to eliminate your waste in the business. You want to reduce as much efficiencies as possible. And a lot of it has to do with economies of scale, looking at what your product is and what you are offering. How best can you push through economies of scale so you have a lower cost, higher quantity? That makes sense. You want improved efficiency in your business. So how can you, as a business, enable or improve your operational efficiencies by optimizing different processes, reducing cycle times, having better productivity in your business? You want to automate some tasks in order for you to have better efficiencies, eliminate as much bottlenecks as possible with the automation. Then you have inventory automation or inventory optimization, sorry. Here you have your balance between a supply and a demand. You want to implement better demand forecasting, replenishment strategy so that you can meet your customers' demand at the end of the day by producing enough supply. So this is one of the inventory optimization. So demand planning, demand forecasting, inventory optimization. This is where a lot of your benefits for supply chain. If you get this right, you don't end up with too much of stock, which money sits in stock, or you don't end up with obsolete items, and you don't end up with shortage of items. Then you have one of the benefits is being faster to market. So having a good supply chain allows you to be faster to market for new products, because you have strategic management, you have better action plans, you have your goals that's relating to your supply chain, you have relationships with different shared activities, value activities, different business activities in your market between your supplier, your manufacturer, your retailer, your logistics partner, all of these wonderful people in your business, where everyone basically comes together to bring products quicker into market. And then the most obvious one, which is everyone's role or everyone's end goal, is customer satisfaction. How can you ensure a timely delivery of your product at a high quality? So supply chain plays a huge crucial role in making sure that you have the most customer satisfaction as possible by quality, by time, by responsiveness. You want to make sure your product is accurate so you don't have incorrect products being sent to the customer and thereafter returned, because it does give the customer a little bit of a bad taste of your product or your business. You want to reduce your delivery time as possible. Maybe this means having decentralized locations so you can get to your customer a lot faster. And also giving them a better customer experience in conjunction with different APIs and logistics companies, you're able to create visibility of status of product. So this does 100% help. Okay, I know we don't have a lot of time, but just very quickly on a supply chain structure. So when we're talking about supply chain structure, there's different factors that we have to consider, which is all of these factors in the bottom. in order for you to basically evaluate and best assess what makes sense and what works for you. So when we're talking on complexity, we want to look at your different supply chains, who's your supplier, your manufacturer, distributor, etc. So everybody that's involved in it, because this is what creates a complex supply chain. Efficiency, how best you can lower costs, increase your quality. You want to be flexible so that you can get better responsiveness of your supply chain in the market, withstand different market conditions, customer demands is adhered to, any unforeseen disruptions like your COVID-19, geopolitical, natural disasters, all of this is taken into account. When we're talking about resilience, very similar from a risk perspective. How can you best manage your strategies and have better contingency plans in place? You want to also align with different strategic objectives. So evaluating the business's supply chain with the overall business strategy and objectives, as we first spoke about, bringing into account Porter's forces, cost leadership, differentiation, focus, making sure that your goals are aligned with your strategy. You have collaboration, you have integration, and this is between all your various functions and your different stakeholders in the business, from supplier, manufacturer, distributor, retailer, customer. Tech and innovation, so using technology and innovation to have better supply chain visibility and transparency so that you have a more efficient supply chain, whether it's AI, data analytics, Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, all of those wonderful things that just make your supply chain work a lot more efficient. And then the last one is performance and improvement. So assessing your business's performance against different KPIs, against different metrics, whether it is inventory turnover, on-time delivery statistics, or how much is it to actually, what is the cost to serve? So evaluating the business opportunities or abilities to identify different areas of improvement, what is the corrective actions you can take, and drive as much improvement initiatives in your supply chain over time. So when you evaluate all these different factors, you gain a lot of insights into what your business stands for from a SWOT analysis perspective. So that you can bring in improvement into your supply chain. You can develop strategies. You can also enhance your supply chain's resilience, the competitiveness in the market. Okay, so I know that was a mouthful today. That was quite a bit, quite a big learning unit. But that's basically us for this evening. I will share the recording with all of you on the YouTube channel. I did post the YouTube link yesterday. So please go through that just to gain a little bit more knowledge. I tried to cover all of the items that is listed in the module outline 4.3.1 and 2 because there was so much of similarities. But please go over it, go over the textbook, go over the different concepts, use external reading as much as possible, which I will share with you during the course of this weekend. But yes, have a good evening, and we will chat again next week, Thursday, at the same time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.